In a restaurant filled with golden lights and laughter, one scream shattered the night. A ruthless mafia boss stood to act, not for power, but because his little daughter whispered, "Daddy, can we save her?" That moment changed everything. A hunted woman's secret, a child's innocent plea, and a man feared by the world suddenly caught between love and blood. But when war comes crashing through his walls, can a mafia boss protect the family he never knew he needed? Or will the world force him to choose between power and love? Now let's dive in. The evening shimmered with elegance. Chandeliers spilled golden light over polished tables, casting soft halos on the faces of patrons who laughed, toasted, and leaned into conversations meant only for the night. The clink of silverware against fine china created a gentle rhythm, harmonizing with the low notes of a piano drifting from the corner. Aromas of aged wine, garlic, and roasted lamb hung richly in the air, making the restaurant feel like a sanctuary where time itself seemed to slow. People dined in comfort, believing themselves untouchable by the chaos of the outside world. But perfection has a fragile skin, and sometimes all it takes is one crack for everything beneath to bleed through. That crack came in the form of a scream, sharp, ragged, and desperate. It sliced through the atmosphere like shattered glass, pulling every head toward the back of the room. The music halted, laughter died mid-breath, and for a moment, silence rang louder than any sound. Near the last table, half hidden by shadows, a young woman struggled against two men. Their hands gripped her arms with brutal force, jerking her close as she thrashed, her voice breaking as she begged them to let her go. Her chair toppled over, crashing against the marble floor. A few patrons gasped, some froze in fear, while others lowered their heads, pretending not to see. Safety was easier in ignorance. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, darting toward the crowded room as though searching for someone, anyone, willing to help. Her lip trembled as she fought, her nails scraping against one man's sleeve. He only snarled, yanking her tighter, his partner whispering something dark against her ear. Her desperate cry echoed again, bouncing against gilded walls. But no one moved. Fear chained the witnesses in place. No one wanted to be the first to stand. No one dared risk themselves. It was the kind of silence where cruelty thrived. And yet, in the farthest shadowed booth, someone was already watching. Adrian Moretti sat with a stillness that unsettled even the bravest of men. The mafia boss, known for ruthlessness that spanned cities, leaned back in his leather seat, his glass untouched before him. His expression was unreadable, a mask carved from stone, but his presence pressed heavily on the room, a gravity that few dared to acknowledge. His reputation was legend, deals sealed in blood, betrayals answered with merciless finality. He was a man who did not forgive. Tonight, however, he had not come for business or bloodshed. Tonight his purpose was softer, anchored in the little girl beside him. Sophia Moretti, no more than 7, sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes wide and curious. Her long lashes blinked slowly as she studied the woman in peril, and then her gaze lifted toward her father. Innocence radiated from her like fragile light, a stark contrast to the darkness that clung to Adrian. She tugged gently at his sleeve, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Daddy," she murmured, her tone quivering with both fear and compassion. "Can we save her?" The words, small and trembling, rippled through Adrian in a way no enemy's blade ever had. For a fraction of a second, the iron fortress around his heart cracked. His gaze sharpened, slicing toward the scene like a blade drawn from its sheath. The attackers froze under his stare, though they had not yet noticed who exactly was watching them. His silence spoke louder than any threat, a silence that promised consequences. Yet the room itself seemed to hold its breath, unsure which Adrian Moretti it would see tonight. Would it be the merciless lord of the underworld, reminding everyone that mercy was weakness? Or would it be something rarer, something even his enemies whispered could not exist? A savior. His chair creaked as he rose slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled, yet humming with lethal promise. The air tightened, the weight of anticipation pressing down on every soul in the room. The woman's struggling breaths filled the silence, her hope flickering as her eyes met Adrian's across the distance. Her voice failed her, but her gaze begged the question she dared not speak. Would this man of shadows be her executioner or her deliverance? Many cliffhangers whispered in every heartbeat. Patrons edged backward, unsure whether to flee or stay. The attackers stiffened, sensing a storm, but not yet knowing its name. Sophia's small fingers clutched at her father's coat, anchoring him in both darkness and light. And Adrian, standing now with his sharp eyes fixed on the scene, carried within him the weight of a choice that could alter more than one life. The restaurant had fallen silent. Every candle seemed to burn brighter, every shadow stretched longer as the Mafia boss prepared to act. Would Adrian intervene as a savior, or remind the world of his merciless reputation? The room seemed to hold its breath as Adrian's tall frame cut through the golden light, every step steady, every movement brimming with unspoken power. The attackers faltered, realizing too late whose attention they had captured. Their victim's sobs filled the silence. Her trembling body pulled tighter between their rough hands as though she were a shield against the storm about to break. Yet no shield could protect them now. Adrian's gown, always alone, was enough to chill the marrow of men who had faced death before, and in the next heartbeat, death itself seemed to move. In a blur faster than the eye could follow, Adrian struck. His hand clamped the wrist of the first man, twisting with such ruthless precision that a cry of pain tore through the restaurant. A single strike sent him crashing to the marble floor, gasping as his weapon clattered uselessly out of reach. The crowd recoiled, stunned by the speed, as though they had just witnessed something unreal. The second man's instincts screamed for escape, but his body lagged behind his fear. He turned to flee, only to freeze as shadows detached themselves from the corners of the room. Adrian's men, silent as wolves, emerged from the crowd. Suited, broad-shouldered, and cold-eyed, they sealed every door, their presence radiating quiet menace. The second attacker realized too late that the exits had vanished. He was caged, and the predator inside that cage was not a man, but a legend. He stammered something desperate, his words tumbling into the air, but no one cared. The only voice that mattered was the still one in the center, the Mafia boss who had yet to decide whether to show mercy. The young woman stumbled backward, clutching the torn sleeve of her blouse, her breath ragged. Tears clung to her lashes, her entire frame shaking as though the ground itself had turned hostile. She looked at Adrian, not with the gratitude of one saved, but with the fear of someone uncertain whether she had traded one danger for another. Her lips parted, but no words came. A gentle tug broke the moment. Sophia, her small hand wrapped around her father's coat, peered up at him with wide eyes brimming with innocence. "She's scared, Daddy," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread weaving into the night's violence. The crowd shifted uneasily, astonished that such a tender plaisie could exist beside such ruthless power. Adrian's expression flickered for the briefest instant, the cold mask threatening to break. And then something unexpected happened. Adrian extended his hand toward the woman, not as a lord offering dominion, not as a tyrant seizing control, but as a man giving protection. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. His dark eyes softened, just enough for her to see a glimpse of the humanity buried deep beneath years of blood and power. The woman hesitated, torn between instinct and desperation. Yet when her trembling fingers finally brushed his palm, a current passed between them, as though fate itself had written this moment long before tonight. "Your name?" Adrian asked, his voice low, steady, carrying more command than question. "Elena," she whispered, her throat tight, each syllable weighted with exhaustion and fear. The name hung in the air like a secret, unfamiliar, yet immediately significant. Her gaze lowered, as if ashamed, her shoulders folding inward like a woman who had spent too long running from shadows. Adrian studied her in silence. His intuition sharpened like the edge of a blade. There was more to her fear than two reckless men in a restaurant. Something deeper pulsed beneath her words, a danger that clung to her like a second skin. He knew it in the way her eyes darted to the floor, in the hesitation between her breaths. This was not random. This was deliberate. She was being hunted. Why were they after you? His tone held no softness now, only the hard authority of a man accustomed to truth, or blood. Elena's hands twisted in the fabric of her ruined sleeve. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak, but the words strangled themselves before escaping. Her eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, darted toward the shadows where Adrian's men stood like silent sentinels. For a heartbeat, she looked as though she might confess everything, the weight too heavy to carry alone. But then, fear won. Her gaze snapped back to Adrian, and she shook her head, witse, spearing, I can't. The words were fragile, but final. Many cliffhangers hung in every corner of the room. What was she hiding that made men bold enough to attack her in public? What secret could shake her so deeply she dared not share it, even with the man who had just saved her life? And what would Adrian do now that silence stood in place of answers? The Mafia boss did not move, his jaw tightening as the possibilities churned behind his dark eyes. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen, every soul waiting, listening, fearing the next move. Sophia leaned closer, her innocence threading into the heart of the moment, her faith in her father untouched by the violence she had just witnessed. Adrian stood between two worlds, the savior his daughter believed him to be, and the merciless ruler the rest of the world feared. In his hand, Elena's tremble lingered, her secret pressing like a locked door waiting to be broken. He had seen countless lies, countless masks, but hers was different. Hers was born of survival, and it was clear this was only the beginning. What was Elena hiding that made dangerous men hunt her down? The night had ended in silence, but silence never meant peace in Adrian Moretti's world. When dawn bled across the horizon, its pale light found Elena beneath the vaulted ceilings of Adrian's mansion. Marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, walls lined with oil paintings and guarded secrets. It was a place of wealth, power, and intimidation, a fortress built not only to keep intruders out, but to remind those within that escape was never simple. She stood in the hallway with her arms folded across her chest, uncertain whether she was safer here or still trapped in a new kind of danger. Sophia's laughter broke through the heavy air like sunlight piercing clouds. The little girl darted across the grand living room, curls bouncing as she clutched a tuft bear in her tiny hands. She tugged at Elena's sleeve, her wide eyes hopeful. "Will you stay forever?" she asked, her voice sweet and innocent, as if forever were something easily promised. Elena's throat tightened. How could she explain to a child that her very presence carried shadows darker than night? Adrian entered then, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the warmth of his daughter's smile. His gaze landed on Elena, steady and unreadable, though the silence between them was weighted with unspoken questions. To Sophia, he was simply daddy, protector, provider, hero. To the world, he was the ruthless king of a criminal empire. And to Elena, he was both her savior and her captor, a man whose motives she could not yet untangle. "Go play, Sophia," Adrian murmured, his deep voice calm, but carrying the authority of command. The little girl pouted, glancing between them, then skipped away, humming to herself, her presence leaving the room emptier than before. When the door clicked shut, Adrian's attention sharpened. His eyes locked on Elena. "Enough," he said quietly, though his tone was steel. "Why were they after you? I don't accept silence." The demand was sharp enough to slice through her defenses. Elena's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of a chair, her knuckles white. Her lips parted, but fear dragged her words back down. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting against the weight of secrets that had already cost her everything. When she opened them again, tears glistened, tracing a line of vulnerability down her face. Finally, the dam broke. "It's my brother," she whispered, her voice shaking but firming with each word. "He worked for one of your rivals years ago. He discovered things that were never meant to see the light." Adrian's brow furrowed, his mind racing through possibilities. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, as though he could draw the truth out by sheer force of presence. Elena's breath hitched, but she pressed on, the confession spilling from her like blood from an old wound. He found corruption, it reached beyond the syndicates, men with power, men who sit in polished offices during the day but make deals in blood at night. Her voice cracked, but she did not stop. Before he disappeared, he left me everything, files, recordings, names. He told me to keep it safe, to never let it fall into the wrong hands. I didn't even know who to trust. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Every word she spoke wove a web that stretched far wider than he had anticipated. This was no petty feud. This was a spark that could ignite war across the city. His instincts screamed caution, but another, deeper part of him stirred, a part he had buried long ago. "You're saying you've been carrying evidence," he said slowly, his voice dangerous in its calm. "Evidence that makes you a target for every man with blood on his hands." Elena nodded, her tears spilling freely now. "They want it. They want me silenced before it can ever be revealed. And I don't know who I can run to anymore." Her shoulders shook, but she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with fragile courage. "I never asked you to save me. But now, I don't even know if you regret it." For a moment, Adrian said nothing. His silence was heavier than any words, the kind that made the air itself grow cold. Inside, though, something twisted in him. He had spent years navigating lies, betrayals, and violence, yet there was something raw in her honesty, something he could not ignore. Her fear was real, but so was her strength. And it struck him in a place he thought long dead. Sophia's laughter echoed faintly from the other room, reminding him of the line he now straddled, the world of blood he had built, and the fragile light of the family he longed to protect. He looked back at Elena, her face streaked with tears, and for the first time in years, power did not feel like enough. There was something more pressing, something he hadn't expected, the dangerous pull of love. Many cliffhangers stirred between each heartbeat. Could Adrian shield her without igniting a war that might consume them all? Would protecting Elena mean exposing Sophia to enemies far worse than two men in a restaurant? And if he chose to fight, how many lives would be claimed before the dust settled? Adrian's jaw clenched, a decision forming but not yet spoken. His eyes burned with a question he hadn't asked aloud, but that echoed nonetheless. Would he risk war with another Mafia family just to protect her? Would Adrian risk war with another Mafia family just to protect her? The weight of Elena's confession lingered long after the words faded into silence. Adrian's mansion, though vast and guarded, suddenly felt smaller to her, more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. She paced by the tall windows, her reflection fractured against the glass, her thoughts echoing with one truth: she could not stay. To remain here was to invite danger into the lives of those who had already risked too much. Her heart twisted as she watched Sophia playing on the carpet with her dolls, oblivious to the storm outside their walls. The little girl's laughter was fragile, like glass, something too precious to shatter. Elena clenched her fists, her decision firming inside her chest. She could not allow her past, or the enemies it carried, to poison the fragile innocence of this home. She would leave, even if it meant tearing herself from the safety she had found in Adrian's presence. When she finally stood in the doorway, her coat folded over her arm, Adrian appeared behind her, his towering shadow falling across the hall. His voice was low, more warning than question. "Where do you think you're going?" Elena turned, her lips pressed tight, her eyes fighting tears. "If I stay, they'll come for me again. And this time, they won't stop at me. They'll go after Sophia. I won't have her blood on my hands." Her voice cracked, but her resolve held. She reached for the door handle, her body trembling. Before she could open it, a softer voice pierced the tension. "Please don't go." Sophia stood at the edge of the staircase, her small hands gripping the railing, her eyes round and pleading. She stepped down slowly, her innocence filling the silence heavier than any threat. "You make Daddy smile." The words struck like lightning. Adrian's eyes flickered, his mask of steel cracking as he looked at Elena, seeing the truth in what his daughter had spoken aloud. Elena's hand slipped from the doorknob, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Sophia's simple plea cut through all the reasons she had built to leave. It was harder to fight a child's honesty than an enemy's bullet. That night, the storm outside the mansion faded, leaving only the crackle of the fireplace casting shadows across the room. Adrian stood near the flames, his dark silhouette bathed in orange light, a man forged from both shadow and fire. Elena sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her heart hammering with emotions she didn't dare name. Silence stretched between them, heavy, charged, more dangerous than any bullet. Finally, Adrian broke it. His voice was low, almost rough, as though the words cost him more than any confession of power. You think I saved you because of circumstance, but it's more than that. It's the way you look at me, the way you make me feel something I thought I buried years ago. His eyes held hers, unflinching, unguarded. You make me feel human again. The air thickened, their breaths shallow, the tension pulling them closer like an invisible thread. Elena's hand brushed against his, tentative, trembling. Sparks raced across her skin, and in that moment, it felt as though the world outside no longer existed. Adrian's hand closed over hers, strong yet gentle, a contrast that made her heart stumble. Her lips parted, a confession forming in her throat, and he leaned closer, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. Their hearts raced in unison, breaths mingling, the space between them narrowing to nothing. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The past, the danger, the shadows, all faded, leaving only this moment, fragile and electric. Then a sound shattered it. A gunshot cracked through the night, exploding the fragile silence like glass under a hammer. The window behind them erupted in shards, scattering across the floor like diamonds under firelight. Elena gasped, instinctively pulling back, but Adrian was faster. He surged forward, his body shielding hers, the weight of his frame pressing her to the ground just as another bullet tore through the room. The fire roared louder, casting wild shadows as chaos erupted. Sophia screamed from the hallway, her small voice splintering through the noise. Adrian's men stormed into position, guns drawn, shouting orders as more bullets slammed into the walls. Rivals had breached the sanctuary, turning their home into a battlefield. Elena's heart pounded in her ears, her body shaking beneath Adrian's protective hold. She clutched his coat, her voice breaking. They found me. They found us. Fear coiled tight in her chest, but beneath it burned a desperate question she dared not ask. Adrian's eyes, sharp and unwavering even under fire, met hers for a split second. He pressed closer, shielding her as the sound of glass and gunfire tore through the mansion. In that moment, he was no longer the Mafia boss, no longer the feared lord of the underworld. He was a man caught between the love he could not deny and the violence that would not release him. Many cliffhangers surged in every breath. Would his men hold the line against the attackers? Could Sophia be kept safe, or would the innocence she carried be shattered in an instant? And above all, could Adrian survive this storm, or would the very act of shielding Elena cost him the life he had only just begun to live? The night burned with fire, glass, and bullets, but the most dangerous fire of all was the one that had already ignited between them. See, would Adrian survive the storm to keep Elena and Sophia safe? The gunfire raged through the halls, echoing off marble floors and shattered glass. Adrian's men fought with ruthless precision, their loyalty unshaken even as bullets whistled past their heads. The rival attackers pushed hard, but every step closer to Adrian's family was met with ferocity, until the mansion itself seemed to roar with resistance. Adrian, his body still shielding Elena, rose to his feet with blood streaking his temple, his eyes blazing like a man who had nothing left to lose but everything left to protect. Elena clung to him, trembling, but in her chest was a fire of her own. For the first time, she wasn't just a hunted woman. She was standing beside the one man who refused to let her fall. Sophia's cries pierced through the smoke. desperate and terrified, pulling at Adrian's heart in a way no bullet could ever pierce. He motioned for Elena to stay low, then stepped forward into the storm, his presence commanding even in chaos. One by one, the intruders fell, outmatched by the disciplined fury of Adrian's men. Blood painted the walls, steel clashed, and the air grew heavy with the scent of gunpowder. Yet through it all, Adrian fought like a man who knew this battle was not about territory or reputation. It was about the fragile lives behind him. His fists and bullets carried not just power, but purpose. At last, the gunfire began to fade, the sounds of boots retreating echoing down the long driveway. Silence, jagged and uncertain, settled over the ruined mansion. Adrian stood in the center of the destruction, chest heaving, his shirt torn and stained with blood that wasn't only his own. In his arms, Elena staggered forward, her eyes searching his face with terror until she realized he was still standing. Sophia ran to them, her little arms wrapping around Adrian's legs with all the force her small body, could muster. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sobbed into his coat. "Daddy, we saved her." Her voice was broken yet victorious, a child's declaration of triumph in the middle of ruin. Adrian's hand trembled as it stroked his daughter's hair. His eyes flickered to Elena, who stood beside him, her torn sleeve and tear-streaked face a haunting reflection of the nightmare they had survived together. And yet, when their gazes locked, it wasn't fear that lingered between them. It was something deeper, something unbreakable. Elena's lips parted, her voice unsteady but certain. "I thought safety was what I needed, but it isn't just safety I feel with you, Adrian." She paused, her heart laid bare in the rawness of her confession. "I feel loved." The words struck him harder than any bullet could have. For years, Adrian Moretti had ruled through fear, through iron and blood. He had been untouchable, unyielding, feared by men who dared not even whisper his name. But in that moment, with Elena's trembling hand pressed against his chest and Sophia's small fingers tangled in his coat, he realized power meant nothing compared to this. The firelight from the shattered hearth flickered across their faces, illuminating a picture he had never imagined for himself. A family, not born of blood and power, but of choice, of love. His jaw clenched, not in rage this time, but in resolve. He would burn down kingdoms, raise empires, and defy the very world if it meant keeping this fragile light safe. He leaned closer to Elena, his forehead brushing hers as he whispered a vow forged not in power, but in love. "No one will touch you. No one will take her. I'll end this war, Elena, no matter what it costs me." Her tears spilled freely, but this time they were not only of fear, they were of release, of hope breaking through the chains of her past. She whispered back, her voice shaking with devotion, "Then I'll stand with you. Whatever comes, I won't run anymore." Sophia, cradled between them, smiled through her tears, her small face glowing with the simple joy of belonging. For her, this was no longer just survival, this was family. The feared Mafia boss stood in the wreckage of his empire, his heart no longer chained to fear, but tethered to the woman and child who had taught him how to live again. Yet in the silence that followed, one truth lingered like a shadow. Love had chosen him, but the world had not. Would the world accept a Mafia boss who chose love over fear? Or would Adrian have to burn everything down to keep them? And so, in the end, the Mafia boss found his greatest treasure, not in power, not in fear, but in the love that made his cold heart beat again. But tell me, would the world ever allow him to keep it? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Heartwoven Tales. Press the bell icon so you never miss the next story, and share it with your friends. Until we meet again, may love always find its way, even in the darkest places.